All right, cool. I am recording. Um, yeah, I think we have four folks that are going to be joining us today that are really awesome. We have Danielle Sweeney, Alyssa Lundgren, Caitlin Kradick, and Rob Stringer. They're all in different like spaces post Turing, doing different things and like wildly successful out there. So super excited to hear from them on their different paths. I think Danielle just popped in. Danielle, if you want to wave so everyone knows who you are. Cool. Yeah. I can kind of like start us off. Danielle, I think you and I are the only ones that are here so far of the folks that are going to be like talking today. But I'll kind of start us off. And then I was thinking this is super informal, so we could just kind of like pass the mic around a little bit to like alumni that are in different roles that are like joining us to talk about stuff. And if we have extra time and have other alumni that also have other varied experiences that they want to share with the group, that'd be cool too. And I think we could maybe open it up to questions for everyone after an alumni shares their experience. And yeah. Um, but I work with Turing in their like instruction team as well as their admissions team, and I'm an alumni myself. And I also work outside of Turing doing like some freelance software engineering. And I got into that world through like just connections with alumni at Turing and some of my personal connections as well. And so my personal experience has been like a bunch of different small like contracts or freelance things doing software engineer work, and then more heavily working with Turing. Um, yeah, and I think I like in my personal like how did I get there, my main thanks is to like all of the alumni who have given me referrals along the way or said, hey, I have this friend that needs this website built, can you do it? And small things like that end up allowing you to like build your portfolio and get somewhere. um yeah, I'm gonna pass it off to Danielle because you have a very different experience than I do, and I would love to hear what your journey has been like after Turing.
Yeah. So I am an associate application support engineer at a larger fintech startup called Trust. I am lucky that a lot of support engineers end up having to work directly with the customer. I do not. We have customer service reps and business analysts that have to talk to the customer and figure out what their needs are and interpret them for us. Um, it's been a great experience so far. My team, I feel like I got really lucky. They are just really supportive. I feel like I can tell that they're invested in my growth and development. Um, During my hiring process, my manager made sure to mention, because I think he knew better than I did at the time, that the role I have taken was not at all what I was looking for. Because it's a lot less code. It's more on the back end. I'm working in Groovy, Python, and SQL, if and when I do get to do coding. But he did make sure to mention while he was hiring me that there was mobility around the company. If this wound up not being the right role for me, to please let them know instead of just leaving. So right now I would like to feel confident in the role that I'm in before moving around in the company, but it is really nice to know that that's an option that I can do. I've signed up for the mentorship program at my company that should kick off this month, and I requested a woman, ideally on one of the dev teams, ideally working in the front end stack. So fingers crossed I just get someone that's on a dev team to just kind of start networking around my company for when something does open up that maybe I can switch over. Um, yeah, so things are going well, but if there are any questions or I can elaborate on any areas, please feel free to ask.
Nice. I feel like I can start us off with a question, and then if other people like give them a second to think about their questions and stuff. But how did you end up finding this role, Danielle? And like, how long after Turing was it till you found it? Like, what got you in there?
So this is something I tell any grad that I do like a donut with. You, this is your time in life to be completely and utterly shameless. If there is someone in your life that knows a developer or works in tech, you need to know that person. You need to be talking to that person. I got a referral from my cousin who does not write any code, but she has been a project manager at Bill Trust for going on 9 years, I think now. And she personally knew everyone on my hiring panel. So I could at the very least be like, oh yeah, you know my cousin. She's a really hard worker. We're a lot alike. And get my foot in the door that way. Yeah, so that was about 5 months into my job hunt. And at that point, I was just whatever job I could get to get my foot in the door and get some kind of job experience. Um, to prepare for my interviews, I did technical mock interviews through Turing. I got lucky, I had one scheduled already. And we were able to focus it on Build Trust in the role that I was applying for. I met with any and all backend engineer mentors in my house group, just trying to get some insight or talking points for Groovy, Python, and SQL. And any other backend devs that I knew that they could send me any links or anything to prepare. I tried to be as over prepared as I could be for that interview. So
Nice. Jupe, I think you have your hand up. Go for
yeah.
it.
Working in like an adjacent position, do you feel like you get enough time with code? Do you feel like your skills are um, staying the same from work, or do you feel like you need to study outside of work to stay on top of it?
If I were to start applying to front end roles again, I would probably start doing some leak code again, doing some idea boxes, trying to refresh the like additional skills that I have, like Redux, context API, testing, just to be a little bit fresher on like the learning points of it, on like my knowledge points. Um, but I do feel like I'm learning new skills at my job, and even like an area of weakness that I had during Turing was definitely following the breadcrumbs, like through failures and through errors. And that is like all I do now, is track down file failures, figure out, hopefully, fingers crossed it's the data file and it's a customer screw up. But even then, you may have a 20,000 line data file that you have to like learn how to hone your instincts about what could be wrong. Um, so I've definitely gotten a lot better at that. I still do some scripting, but it's smaller code snippets. So yeah, if I were to start applying for software engineer roles again, I would definitely start, yeah, doing some practice. But there are plenty of other softer skills that I'm getting way better at this job. Even just interacting with our business analysts and the customer service reps on why something is doing what it's doing, why something failed, how we can implement this change, why we can't implement this change. The BAs have some technical knowledge, but not a lot. And the customer service reps definitely don't. And there are also even language barriers on top of that because we're worldwide. So definitely honing a lot of putting tech speak into plain English speak as well, which is a really important soft skill.
Thank you.
Yeah,
That's very helpful.
yeah, good. Hi, Anne.
Hi, I might have missed this. How long have you been in your position at this point?
Good question. I started last June, so I am coming up on a year. Fingers crossed I get a promotion.
Nice. And can you talk a little on your job search journey? Did
Yeah.
you go through a handful of interviews? What was your process like?
It was rough. It was like, I'm not gonna lie to you, it was really rough. I think I maybe got like 2 other interviews, and then I got lucky and got a take home for charter, which wound up going to another Turing student from my cohort who was way better than me, to be quite frank. Like he just was, his skills were sharper, way faster. And I actually just heard he's doing great there. But I only got that take home because I knew one of the senior engineers. She was a mentor for another person in my cohort, and she kind of just became everyone's mentor. And I was hitting anyone and everyone up for advice, for any take-home challenges that I could do, not even to get a job, but just to practice.
Right.
Um, which I would say, like, yeah, get your hands on any take home, because the take home I did, it didn't get me a job, but I learned so much doing that take home. And then I even got like more lucky. And the senior engineer I knew took time out of her day on a weekend to go over my take home project with me and teach me how I could have made it better.
Very nice. Thank you.
So yeah, no, it was rough. I did not get that many. And I applied to like, I think it was like 1,000 jobs.
Well, I think I'm reading this correctly, that you're not the least bit disappointed. So congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it could be more money, but like in terms of learning and just like a supportive team, I feel very lucky and very grateful. My team is really wonderful.
That's awesome, Danielle. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Anyone else have questions for Danielle? All right. I don't see, I think we had a few other folks that were going to join us, but I don't see them in our participant list. I am more than happy to talk more about my experience. I went over it really quick in the beginning because I was like, I don't want to take time from like the people that we have speaking. But before I do that, I wanted to also open up the floor because I know we have some alumni here. If there are any alumni that dropped by because they're like, hey, this sounds like something that I did and I want to share my experience with folks. So if that's you, feel free to like raise your hand or something, and we're happy to hear from you as well. Yeah, I guess in the meantime, I can just like kind of go over my experience like more in detail, similar to how Danielle did. But I graduated Turing 2023 in October. I think it was like last day of September. So pretty much October last year. And then like hit the ground running with job hunt, felt very similar to Danielle. And then I was like, I wasn't really getting any interviews. And I did get one interview like early on that like felt a little bit like beginner's luck. I went through the front end program at Turing. And I ended up like getting in touch with someone that was at a startup like Rails company. And I knew no Rails. They were like, hey, here is this take home challenge, half in JavaScript, half in Rails. And for context, the way that I got this was actually a cohort mate of mine had someone reach out to them through like Terminal. And they didn't end up going with the opportunity and they passed it off to me. So I was really grateful for that. So I took a little bit of time, did some research, and did both the front end and the back end challenge and got that interview. I didn't get the job. No surprise there. They were looking for like a Rails engineer, and that was just not me, you know? But like Danielle said, the experience of like getting that take home was super helpful. I learned a ton from like having to like learn a little bit about a new language on the fly, right? And it was kind of cool to see that like, okay, it set the tone that like I don't need to necessarily only apply for like React JavaScript jobs just because I graduated from Turing's front end program, right? I can look around at other things. And then I think my second opportunity after that, if I'm remembering correctly, actually came from Danielle, who's here with us today. We had met at a donut, and she had like another similar role open at her company that was like a non-software engineer role, and the company was great. I went through the interview process with them. It took about a month of interviewing, and that was for a business analyst position, I think, if I remember that correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't end up getting that job either, which was totally fine. I think going through the interview experience like kind of helped me grow and like learn what to expect. I think it was great. I got some advice from like alumni early on to just like if you are lucky enough to get an interview, no matter what the role is for, just do the interview because it will help you. And then once you get to the end, if you even get the offer, that's when you can decide like if that's something that you want or not, right? So the whole time throughout, I was like, I'm not even worried about whether or not I get this job. Like at least I'm learning through this process. And there were mistakes that I made in the interview process, things that I learned, and like definitely, I think some of the things that I learned were like it's important to like have a ton of questions ready to go, because one of my interviews was basically just like, hey, what are the questions that you have? And I had like 4 questions because I thought they were going to be asking me more stuff. So I was like, okay, note to self, next time I'm going to have a list of like 20 questions written down so that I can fire them off if the pressure's on me to ask questions. And throughout that time, I had also like started working a little tiny bit in terms of like contract freelance work. The first thing that I did like outside of Turing in terms of work was I built a website for a family member slash like friend, and I actually did that for free. But I think that like it really set the tone for me to be able to like start working as a freelance engineer and telling people like, hey, here's my portfolio, here's things that I've done outside of school, right? Here's a website that I made for an actual business. Didn't matter. No one needed to know that I didn't get paid for it, right? I still did the work, did the dang thing. It's there, it's real. And then after that, I was kind of just like going with the flow with any type of contract work that came my way. And there was a post in one of the Turing channels. Someone was looking for an engineer from Turing to be able to work on their Rails app. Here I go again with the Rails stuff, graduating from the front end side of things. But they were looking for someone to like help with styling and some JavaScript on their Rails app. And this was actually a Turing grad that like was starting their own company. And so I was like, I'm gonna go for it. And I showed them my portfolio and my work. And then I like landed my first paid opportunity working like some contract freelance work, which was so awesome and great. And I've learned so much from that because it's like, I'm working in a language that I like didn't know at all before. And then from there, the ball started rolling a little bit where I started getting more comfortable telling people in my life that I was a software engineer and saying I'm a software engineer instead of, oh, I graduated, from the school called Turing. Things like going to the nail salon and telling my like the guy who does my nails, like, I'm a software engineer, and him being like, oh, maybe you could work on my website. I didn't end up working on his website, but opportunities like that started to present themselves a little bit more. I ended up working on another website for a life coach. And then after that, a couple of other opportunities arose, and I now work with one company called AutoNotes. They're an AI EHR system, and I work as a front-end software engineer for them part-time. And then I also do contract work for another company called Bondadosa. Both of those I like interviewed for. Bondadosa, I had like 2 technical challenges. Oh no, I had one technical challenge that was a take home for them. And in between that period, I think there were a couple of other interviews that I'm forgetting about where I also had like, take home challenge, and then went through the interview process, loved the company, didn't get the job. But I think like every single time I went through an interview process, I came out stronger. So much so that like the last interview process that I had was this Bondadosa company. And now I'm like, okay, I've got enough work contracting there, contracting at AutoNotes, working at Turing, you know. But that last interview, I was just like so comfortable, you know, all the questions that they were asking me, I didn't feel like, oh, like how do I deal with prioritizing my work between contracts? I had the experience, you know, it was built up through these small, like little contracts one by one. Um, Danielle, perfect timing because I am done talking.
I just wanted to piggyback off of that and say, like, do as many mock interviews with as many people as possible, because I think that's also a reason why I was able to land the job that I have now. I was mock interviewing like every week. As soon as they offered one up, I was signing up, especially if Turing offers them with actual tech recruiters. Um, and doing the behavioral ones even, because my interviews ended up all being all behavioral. I had no tech challenge. They knew they were hiring someone new for an associate role, and that they were gonna have to teach me everything that I needed to know. But by the time I got to these interviews, I was just so comfortable. I had all of my stories on the tip of my tongue. I could spin them for a multitude of different questions. Um, yeah, and just the communication. That's still something I get praised about on a regular basis. Is just my effective and direct communication, and ability to translate text speak into English. Yeah, so do mock interviews all the time.
100%. Yeah, I think that anytime you get a chance to interview, whether it's actually for a job or it's a mock interview, like every single time you're doing it, you're getting stronger and better and more confident. And it's easier, like Danielle said, for you to apply those stories to like different situations. Um, this is just like a little bit of advice, but I started like just keeping my materials like from whatever I worked on up during interviews. Like I use Notion to organize myself. I use a time tracking app to organize the time between different contracts. So when questions come up, like how do you prioritize work or how do you organize your time, right? I can just say, actually, can I screen share with you and show you how I do it? You know, and then it's like you're giving them a real example of how you work rather than just telling them. Um, yeah. Does anyone have questions either for Danielle or for myself? Oh, Nathan, I see your mouth moving, but I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. I was just kind of like thinking out loud about questions.
Oh, okay. No worries. Sorry, I thought you were asking one. Um, Dana said, were all of your interviews in person or online? All of my actual interviews were online, but this did bring up something that I forgot about in my journey that was helpful. I did do a lot of like LinkedIn networking and like reaching out to people in my area. I don't live in Denver, but this would probably be even easier if you do live in Denver because there's so many Turing grads there. But I like reached out to people that I didn't know that work at companies like downtown where I live. And I also asked Jeff Casimir if he had connections where I live. And I was like, hey, do you know anyone that works in this area that would be good for me to talk to, and built relationships with them? I ended up like with one of the companies, like talking to one of their senior engineers, and they invited me to a lunch at their company. So that was a great networking opportunity to like meet people from a company in person and talk to other software engineers and like learn more from them. It didn't turn into a job, but it also did like, I think that the confidence there and like presenting yourself is something that can like be built over time, and it definitely helped with that. But in terms of actual interviews, mine were also all online.
To add to the networking bit, yeah, I also, while I was job hunting, you know, this isn't how I wound up getting my job, but I went through the Turing JCS channel. And anyone that had a company listed in their profile, I researched that company And if they were hiring, I sent them a message asking to chat. And even if they weren't hiring, but I liked the company, I sent them a message and did a donut with them, or tried to, so that if something opened up, I could hit them up for a referral. And they're like, oh yeah, I remember that girl. I liked her. Um, Something I always tell job hunting grads also is start a list of companies to check every week. You check their job postings every week. If you have a connection there, put the connection next to the company name. Try and get specific. What do you like about the company? Yeah, and then because people aren't like, people will tell me like, oh, can you let me know if something opens up at your company? And I'm like, I don't know if things are opening up at my company. I'm not looking at the job postings because I'm not looking to change roles. But if you let me know that something is open at my company that you want to apply to, I will give you a referral. So you need to have that list and you need to be the one doing the checking. Yeah.
That's a great point. I think that's a big mistake that I made in the beginning was like, I
Same.
did so much networking and I always was like, well, they'll let me know if something opens up.
You're
No.
not looking. Yeah, unless I'm looking to change roles and then like I'm looking for specific, like a specific role that I would want to move into. Yeah, I mean, I didn't think about that either when I was job hunting. I thought the same thing, that people would let me know, but especially if you work fully remote like I do, the pool of people that I speak to every day is pretty limited to my own team and like a couple of people outside of it, depending on the ticket I'm working on. So,
Yeah, that's the same for me. Like if any of these companies that I was contracting with like had open roles, like there's a potential that I might know about them, but there's potential that I might not, especially these roles that are like outside of like specifically engineering. Like I'd probably have a better idea if they were hiring someone on my team or something, right? But
exactly.
right. Some of these large companies, like there's so many different engineering teams that you might work on, right? You don't know if they're hiring on other teams as well.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, for the folks that didn't end up joining us, that were going to share their experiences, I can just tell you a little bit about them. And then if there's anyone else that wants to like jump in and share their experience, that's totally like welcome. But I know that one of the other folks that was going to speak with us today, his name is Rob Stringer. He's awesome. He actually also started his like journey into software engineering via like the contract world. So I actually think I have a message from him when we were talking about like, what was his journey into this like? And I think he said something like, someone wanted to pay me to like write some Rails and it wasn't very much. It was like $30 an hour and I was just okay with it. And I did that until the next person was ready to pay me more. And I kept doing that until I finally ended up in like a full-time role. So there's that kind of situation too, where people end up working like small like short contracts like until they end up landing their first role. So I think flexibility and like what you're looking for can be important rather than only looking for like full-time specific jobs. And for context, Rob now works as like a senior system reliability engineer or something like that. So it ended up working out. He just took a different path to get there. And throughout the whole time, he was like writing code and stuff like that. And then I think there are situations with a lot of people that end up in situations where they're like working a QA engineer role and then eventually they move on into another position at their company. Which the other person that was going to join us, her name is Caitlin Kradick, and I think her first role out of Turing is as a junior QA engineer. And I know that she had mentioned that it's with like her dream company and that like she loves the environment there. So that's another thing to consider too when you're looking for your first role is like, okay, am I getting my foot in the door, and am I also maybe doing it with a company that I really enjoy spending my time with, right? Oh, I see a question in the chat. Where can I find lower paying contract type of roles like that? I don't see a ton of them on Indeed. I would actually like to get work experience. Yeah. I know there is, ooh, I don't know the name of it off the top of my head, but I know there are some like apps where you can find contract type work. Um, the other thing that I would suggest, like just coming from my personal experience with getting contract work and like working up in that kind of space, is to like, if you're a new grad or you're a current student, work on something for a family member or a friend who owns a business, even if it's a really small business, even if it's like a private practice, something, right? Because then the next time that you talk to someone, you can say, here's this thing that I built for a business, right? If you're a back-end developer, is there something that you can build for them that makes their work life easier? If you're a front-end developer, do they need a website? And then from there, you can like share that with people in your life, and also pay close attention to like folks on Slack at Turing. Because I think that things end up coming up a lot, like in Turing Slack, like where people are looking for contract engineers at their companies or startups and stuff like that.
Yeah, I know that there are websites like dedicated to this. You might have to search in some of the channels. I don't remember which one, because so like the channels have been all changed around since I graduated and like renamed. But I do remember there being posts about this like when I had recently graduated. So maybe search like gig or contract and see what comes up. But you might have to go far back. Yeah, but Upwork might be good.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry that I don't have like off the top of my head what app to use for that, but definitely an interesting path to go down. Yeah, does anyone else have other questions? I feel bad. I'm sorry that there's not more to share.
I could ask you a question, Laura, because just piggybacking off of the contract work thing, because I mean, I don't know that I'm potentially enticed by the freedom that doing contract work could provide. I don't know. I've never been a contract worker before, so it might be like too much to handle, but I guess you have a couple contract roles and then you also work for Turing. Do you see yourself like if someone offered you a full-time job right now and it was like what you wanted it to be, would you feel, I don't know, like how would you feel about leaving behind the contract life to go into that? Because I mean, obviously, like, I don't know, you probably get health insurance through Turing, but like as like a contract worker, you probably don't get health insurance. All that stuff kind of makes sense, but I don't know. I'm just curious about it.
That's a very good question. And there's a lot to consider in terms of like how I do my taxes, health insurance. I work part-time at Turing, so I don't get health insurance there. I actually don't have health insurance right now.
I didn't mean to laugh.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the
I
spot.
know that feeling.
But I think there's like pros and cons. If I was like presented with an opportunity to like take a W-2 full-time software engineer job with health insurance and stuff, I'd be like, heck yeah, let's go. Let's do this thing. But I don't think that like me being willing to take that takes away from like, how much like I've learned getting here, and like how it's like helped me to like have these different roles. I think also like you have so much freedom as a contractor, but it doesn't have to be like, do I want to do this for the rest of my life type of thing, right? Like I think when y'all enrolled at Turing, I think someone in admissions or in the beginning, it generally says something like, if you choose front end or back end, it's not like the rest of your life type of decision. A lot of people end up doing like back end after going to the front end program. same thing with like if you start off contracting or something, that doesn't have to be what it's like forever for you. As in like for me, you know, maybe eventually that'll like turn into full-time work. Rob just got here, and I know that for him, he started off the same way and now has a really awesome killer full-time job. So yes, if I was presented the opportunity, I would go work full-time, but contract work also does allow you like flexibility, and like I think it's okay for it to like lead somewhere and not have to be like the end all be all, or for you to go back and forth if that's what you end up doing in your career, you know.
Right on. Yeah, very enticed by the option to be like, oh, and now I'm gonna not work for this month. And
Yeah.
but it's probably put a lot more work into making sure you stay getting work. So
Yeah.
trade-off.
There's also the freedom too of like you make your own schedule, right? Like there's sometimes where I'm like, hey, I don't have to turn in work right now for any of these things, and I have like some time on my schedule. I am just gonna go take a walk in the middle of the day. Like that sounds really nice to me right now, you know? So like there's some of those like personal kind of perks where you can like figure out your own schedule. Um, yeah. If other people don't have questions for me, if you do, feel free to ask. But I also want to give Rob a chance to like tell us about his experience. Rob, I know you just got here, but we were just kind of going around saying what like our experience was like after leaving Turing, like how you got your first few roles and how that led to where you're at now. How you've liked your experience, if you didn't like your experience, just whatever you want to share.
Yeah, totally. Sorry I'm late, but glad to be here. Yeah, so like for me, I started contracting. I had a really like kind of a tough job hunt, as a lot of people do. My like story before Turing, like I didn't have a lot of directly transferable skills. So you know, I meet some people that were in like customer service or marketing or something like that, and it makes for like an easier story for to write. For me, I like worked construction, like worked in weed warehouses, things like that, and like didn't have a college degree, and it was just like really challenging to find a job. So actually, my first opportunity for contracting came from going to a meetup in Boulder, the Boulder Linux meetup. I was just like naturally interested in Linux and just so happened to meet someone there that like was a Rails dev and was like, "Oh, you like Linux? That's cool. You seem cool. Do you want some like Rails work?" And I was like, "Yes, absolutely, more than anything in the world." And yeah, so started contracting for $32 an hour cash, which is way less than I was worth at that time, and certainly way less than I'm worth now. But it like broke the loop. Like for me, contracting was really good because it broke the loop of like need experience to get a job, need a job to get experience, which is like a very well, for me it was like um, a very frustrating thing. But yeah, and then ultimately, like a few months later, it led to a full-time gig, and I took that, and it was awesome. That said, like blanking on her name, Erin. She's like, I think she was in the 2017 mod, but she's currently like contracting consistently at 20 hours a week for like I think 125 bucks an hour right now or something like that. And she's able to like she's really passionate about art. So like half her time she's making art and half her time she's like making like 3 times as much as you would in any like normal job out in the world. Presuming you're not like a accountant or banker or something like that, which I guess isn't a normal job. Uh yeah, so like my thoughts on contracting specifically, like I think it could be a really good way to break the loop. Um, I also like do think there's a lot of value in getting a job, like a full-time job somewhere where you can learn for a bit. Like I feel like the sweet spot, like really the sweet spot for contracting comes after you have like 4 or 5 years experience in the industry, because then you can go in and solve like hard problems for people and make more money and be a little more like in demand. But all that to say, like I think that like starting contracting for your first thing is like totally valid. Another thing too, and this is just my opinion, so like definitely take it with a grain of salt, but like I'm of the belief that like you should absolutely like take what like don't feel bad about leaving something quickly, especially early in your career. Like if you take a job, like say you get a job, it's not your dream job, but you're like helping touch up a WordPress site or something like that. If somebody comes along, it's like we want you to be like an engineer at our startup, then like don't worry about like, oh well, I was only there for 2 months. I want it on my resume. Like you should, in my opinion, all of you should ruthlessly prioritize your learning over everything else, especially early in your career. And like at the end of the day, a company will never prioritize you. So like you have to prioritize your learning. And yeah, that's my opinion on the matter.
I have a question for you, Laura and Rob. Just coming from like a different experience starting out on my team, um, having so much support and so many people to ask questions to. What was it like on those first few contracts for you when you had a blocker and you didn't know what to do? Like, were there people to ask? How did you work through that?
Rob, do you want
You
to
want
go first? Or you want me to go first?
You can go first and then I'll tell mine.
Okay. Well, this is funny because Rob was actually like my first boss. Um,
Nice.
so when I told you all that like I started contracting for an alumni who started their own startup company, that was actually Rob. And luckily enough for me, like Rob being great and being an alumni at Turing, like it was really easy for me to be able to like let him know when I had a blocker or let him know when I was struggling with something. And there were quite a few times when we just like paired on the computer. And then it was a great experience for me, like adding on to that in terms of like learning like new skills about like how to move forward when I'm stuck, and also learning like how do I like write my tickets properly and like manage my GitHub project board, because that all kind of changed a little bit from like when I was at Turing versus like on the job. And then after that, at like other contracts, I think it depends sometimes on the company. Like currently I work for two different companies where like um the way that I might go about asking for help might be different. But luckily, like the senior engineers or the other engineers on the team at both are really like welcoming and supportive of me being able to like ask questions. Um, yeah, and a lot of times people will be just like willing to pair with you. Sometimes though, like I have asked a question and then, like been told, hey, go ahead and read this documentation first and then we can work on it together. And it's like, I know that's a skill that we learned at Turing, but like it really gets built more when you're like on the job and you're like, oh shoot, yeah, I really do need to like read this documentation, understand how this tool works, and then ask for some help afterwards.
Yeah, I've definitely had that experience too. And then my like personal goal for the year at the company is redoing our documentation because it's trash. And like was not completely and utterly new person friendly. And I would get sent a link after asking a question the same way and be like, yeah, I saw that. I don't understand it. Like that's for someone that's familiar with Bill Trust and how Bill Trust does things. Yeah, so that's really good to hear though.
Yeah, I feel like I have a follow-up question for you, although I want to hear Rob's answer too, but
Yeah.
I'm curious like what your process is like when you're asking for better documentation, especially being at a big company. Like it sometimes could be more comfortable in like a contract role, but yeah.
So, Rob, do you want to go first and then I'll tackle that question or?
Go ahead and tackle it, because
Okay.
I've got a lot of thoughts. So let's just like keep going down this thing that you're talking about.
So pretty early on, I started calling things out in the documentation as just straight up being wrong. Like I would be following exactly what like the how to or, guide to your first case. And I would be calling it out like I did exactly this. And then we'd realize that, oh, it's not done that way anymore. Oh, it's been changed to this variable name actually. Um, so I got encouraged by my manager, like, hey, you're part of this team now. You can update this documentation. So we got everyone on the team read write access. And for this particular goal, because it's like everybody at the company has a goal, I am pairing this like with one of the senior engineers on my team who loves to write documentation and is very, very good at it. And like has fun with it. Like his documentation makes me laugh as I'm reading it. So that's been really helpful. And like I'm able to do small things, like I'm building out a landing page for engineers specifically on my team. Because there are I think there's 3 teams on the app, like in the app support org. But specifically for my team, because part of it was just that I didn't know these pages existed. It would have taken me forever to discover that they existed on my own. So I'm just, yeah, making our own landing page and then calling stuff out as I go through things and keeping a list for the senior engineer. And when he has time, he's going back through and making updates and usually agrees with me that things could be updated, it could be explained more. A lot of the times how to validate or test something before we send it to QA is not included in the documentation. And that's not helpful. I don't know how to test it. I've never done it before. And I don't want to get yelled at by QA for sending them something that isn't ready for them. So that's how we've decided to tackle it on our team.
Nice. Thank you for that. That's super helpful to know.
Yeah.
Rob, whenever you're ready, if you feel like talking to Danielle's original question.
Yeah, so my first contracting job, my experience was like a little bit different in the sense that like I pretty much was like left on my own. And this is a big reason why like I encourage people like if you are contracting or what I was saying earlier about prioritizing your learning, there can be some value. That said, there can be some value to like being left hanging a little bit, and that was something that I had to find out. Like the guy that I was contracting for wasn't particularly polite, and his attitude was basically like, wherever you go work in the world, like nobody's really going to want to help you. That was like his opinion on the matter. And I don't agree with that opinion. However, I do think that like everything, like I do think there's a grain of truth in the sense of like, especially if you come on at like a senior engineer somewhere at a company, like to really level up your skills, like to be able to be self-sufficient and to like find things out. So for me, it really helped me develop like a hierarchy of like how to find information. Like when I was at Turing, like let's say I couldn't bundle something, or I guess if you're front end, like npm install, the first thing I do is like Google the error, and then I'd find a bunch of like Stack Overflow posts, and I copy paste something, and eventually something would work, and then I'd be like, okay, now I can actually like write code. Um, but eventually, like I kind of realized that like maybe understanding a bit about like how bundler works is like, like the tool that I'm using rather than like how to do the specific thing, like start digging into bundler documentation or NPM documentation. You can just run like NPM space dash dash help, and it'll give you all this information of how to use the tool. And so then it kind of became this thing of like, if it's a quick one-off weird thing, maybe I'll just like Google the error and figure it out. If I'm really struggling with a lot of things with like NPM or something, then I'll take some time to understand how to use NPM. If there's like internal things, then I'll dig through as much internal documentation as I can find and try to like parse it and come up with the best like conclusions possible. And, if all else fails, like you can generally look at the source code of the thing you're using, like if I'm getting an argument error, like some package is giving me an argument error, it's like, well, what's being passed in? And what is blowing up for being nil, and then I can chase that up the chain or down the chain and figure out like where it comes from, and just kind of this like idea of like every system starts somewhere, it ends somewhere, it follows a path, and along that path something breaks, and then you swap that piece out. So when I moved on to like my next like my first like real engineering job, I had a very supportive culture of people that were like very helpful. But even there, I'd still experience this thing of like, for me, it's like I had to ask good questions or else I would just get on people's nerves, because like at the end of the day, like all of us had our own deliverables. We all kind of, things went up the chain. So it's like, while I don't agree with the first guy that I worked with that like nobody's out there to help you, I do believe that like people are pressed for time. People have their own stresses, and it really means a lot to people when you can like um when you can sorry, the comment distracted me a little bit. It really means a lot to people when you can come with a good question and be like, here are the things I tried, these are the things that haven't worked, that have worked, or or best case scenario, you say like, I went through the documentation, I tried this thing, I figured out what it was wrong, I figured out the right thing, I updated the documentation, there's a note for you, rather than even like asking questions. So I'm definitely not saying like that people shouldn't ask questions or anything like that, but like taking a second to be intentional about the question. Like if you're um like in general, I believe that like as software engineers, we should understand like how to use the tools that we work with. So like taking some time to invest in that is a good thing, and it'll speed us up, or like speeds us up generally. Something that like when I mentor students at Turing that I notice a lot is like, is this common thing. It'll be like mod 2 or something, and I'm like teaching somebody how to loop through something and sort it into key value pairs or some programming problem, right? And I'll ask the student that I'm mentoring, I'll be like, well, have you been doing your exercises? And they'll be like, well, I don't have time to do exercises every day because of the projects, And I always tell people like, the projects don't matter. I mean, they do, like obviously they matter for you passing, right? But like if you take the time every morning to do an hour of programming exercises, you're going to be so much faster doing your project. It's like I would argue you don't have time to skip the exercises. And in the same way, it's like at your job, you know, you don't have time to not understand how your terminal really works and how RBIM works and how a path works and all these sort of things that you kind of miss a little bit at Turing. Um, there was a teacher that I had in Mod 3 named Josh Mejia, and like one thing that he told me that really stuck with me that I truly believe in like my heart of hearts, he said like, he's like, if you understand how your computer works, you will be a lot better at your job. And I mean, and while a lot of things have been abstracted away from us, it's like still just like understanding the tools on our laptops, how to use those tools, how to update those tools, how to manage versions, like all that kind of stuff, how to set up a Postgres database, how to hop into a Postgres database and set up a user. You can always just, if you get into Postgres, you can always just do !, and then you get a list of all the amazingly powerful things you can do with Postgres. Like some people's whole career is just being awesome at Postgres, because Postgres is such like a deep, gnarly, hairy tool that can do incredibly powerful things. So I don't know. That was a very long-winded way to say like ask questions, but also take time to understand the tools that you're using and how to use them before you ask questions.
I have kind of a follow-up question on this topic that might keep us going for the next few minutes. I know folks might have to like hop into class soon, but Rob, you touched a lot on like really understanding the technologies that you're working with. What is your stance, since you had a lot of experience with like contract work and then like full-time work? What's your stance on like how you go about using company time to learn new things that are either related directly or indirectly to the work that you're doing, and explaining that like when it comes time, if you need to like talk about your hours or anything like that?
Oh, I mean, like I said earlier, I would say ruthlessly prioritize your learning. And like I would say anything that's like moving towards like deliverables being met and stuff, like go for it. I will say like maybe like the one instance where like I might not necessarily feel that way. Like, well, every full-time job, I like try to block out time during my week for learning. So like, you know, last year I spent a lot of time like independently learning Terraform, and I might not have been working tickets that were Terraform related, but like I know like Terraform's a big part of our tooling at work. So I did that. Most jobs where I've been have like supported that, like especially like full-time jobs at product places. For me, my experience contracting has been like a little bit tougher. Like, for instance, if I was to sell someone an Angular contract and it's like, oh yeah, I'll work on your Angular app and I'll charge you $95 an hour for it or something like that. And like, I don't really have that much Angular experience. I might spend like a little bit of personal time getting up to speed on Angular before I started that project. So like contracting is a little bit different, but because a lot of times as contractors, we are selling ourselves as somebody that can come in and get the job done um, immediately. That said, like if it's a cool contract and it's cool people and they have deep enough pockets, then like just prioritize your learning. Don't worry about
I appreciate that. Jupe, it looks like you had your hand up too, so I want to give you some time to either ask a question or share.
Yeah, I really love the whole prioritized learning. It's just so hard when you're like don't have a job. You're like, oh, I'm gonna go learn programming, and then you're like, well, there's 100 languages and there's 100 ideas and there's AI and like if you're unemployed, like I guess how do you look at that vast world and like pick, I'm gonna learn and focus on this or something like that.
Oh, I should have clarified. When I said like prioritize your learning, I was talking about in the context of a job. I think when you get out of Turing, you should maybe spend 10% of your time doing like programming exercises in the morning time and 90% of your time looking for work. Like you already know how to program. Like don't be like, oh, all these jobs say that I need to learn Python. I'm going to spend the next 3 months learning Python. It's like, no, spend your next 3 months networking, talking to people, meeting people. And then, you know, if you get an interview with a recruiter, then like that's fine. Like maybe do like 15 minutes of like understanding how Python works. And then if you're getting in front of an engineer, then like, yeah, spend a few hours to learn Python. But like, I would say like don't spend too terribly much time um like learning outside of Turing. Like once you get out of Turing, you can already like you're already at least like a C plus to like A minus or A programmer like because of just the time that you've spent doing that. So like fuck learning new technologies. Just like uh, use what you have and find someone to fall in love with you and get a job. Don't, but once you're on the job, then the like take time on the clock to continue learning, to get paid to learn. Because once you start getting paid to learn, then like it's then at that point you've like escaped the loop. Like at this point now from this point forward in your career, you can continue to grow your skill set and get paid for it. And like at that point, then like yeah, dive into whatever you want, like and learn to build a TCP IP stack in C, do something crazy. It literally doesn't matter. But like right when you get out of school, I would say like the job hunt should be definitely over 80% of the focus. And in the morning time, do code exercises. Maybe if you want to keep it fresh, like let's say you went through the backend program, then like do code exercises in JavaScript, right? Or something like that, because you probably know a bit of JavaScript. But like just keep the skills sharp, don't let them atrophy, and find work, find things that continue to grow your skill set. That's
Awesome,
my
thank you.
opinion, at least.
Hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Nice, yeah. I think also sometimes like it can be overwhelming when you're like looking for a job and you're like, oh, I also want to learn something new. What do I learn? Whereas it's like if you say you decide you're like, oh, I'm gonna just learn Python, then maybe you're gonna get a job that's like not even in Python, and then you'll feel like, oh, I could have spent that time learning this language. Like, don't worry about it. You can learn whatever you're gonna need to learn for the job when you're on the job or interviewing for the job. I think
And
definitely
you'll-
spending that time practicing is good.
You'll learn what you need to learn for the job. I don't know if I could necessarily build a project in Python, but I can read enough of our Python to figure out what I need to do and the update I need to make or the explanation I need to give. So yeah.
Exactly.
As a spoiler alert, like Python is just Ruby, but with tabs instead of ends and more like semicolons and parentheses and a little more ugly. So,
And for the front enders, it's very readable if you know JavaScript. The thing that I get hung up on the most is like our global variable names and understanding like, where is this coming from? What is this actually? Because I don't have a terminal where I can just like console log what a thing is. So that's usually what gives me the most issues when I'm trying to figure something out, but it's very readable from a front end background.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what you said, Danielle, you said you'll learn enough to know what you need to do. And that is so spot on. Like, at this point right now, one of my contracts, like, I have to write some Python Django. And I didn't learn that at Turing. I went to the front end program, but like, it's totally fine. Like, it's not like I have to like write a whole entire app in Python, like I might just need to go fix something in the API in order for me to work with it on the front end. And then it's like all I really needed to do, or maybe I need to make a change to the database. Like, so you'll learn as much as you need to learn.
I do have to drop in, get back to work. But it was really nice to meet all of you. Feel free to reach out on Slack if you have any questions and put Build Trust on your list of companies to watch the job postings for. Yeah, thanks guys.
Same
the,
here. Oh, go ahead, Rob.
I was just gonna say, anyone that wants to like chat or shoot the shit or whatever, just reach out to me on the Slack. I'm always happy to help people out and look at cover letters and help prepare for interviews, all that good stuff. Just ping me. I'm around.
Yeah, and Rob's the best for that, so do ping him. If anyone ever wants to chat, I'm here too. You can find me on Slack. It was awesome having you all for this. Thanks for coming, and hopefully we can do this again sometime. Bye. Enjoy the rest of your day.